Tackling the Middle East head-on, President Obama tells Israelis and Palestinians to seize the moment. But how far is the U.S. willing to push to achieve peace this time around? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. U.S. President Barack Obama opens a new round of direct peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians for the first time in nearly 2 years. He's met with the leaders of Israel, Jordan, Egypt and the Palestinian Authority. Obama's goal is to start a process that will ultimately result in a viable Palestinian state alongside Israel. But as Jackie Rowland reports from Washington, huge obstacles remain.
The Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the Palestinian National Authority.
United in one room, the leaders of Israel and its Arab neighbours. Barack Obama takes centre stage, but he makes it clear that the United States alone cannot deliver a peace agreement. That will depend on historic compromises by Israel and the Palestinians.
It is the shoulders of our predecessors upon which we stand. It is their work that we carry on. Now, like each of them, we must ask, do we have the wisdom and the courage to walk the path of peace?
The talks are to be about peace and creating a Palestinian state. But for Israel, one word sums up the agenda: security.
We left Lebanon and we got terror. We left Gaza and we got terror once again. We want to ensure that territory will concede, will not be turned into a third Iranian-sponsored terror enclave armed at the heart of Israel, and may I add, also aimed at every one of us sitting on this stage.
But for the Palestinians, there is another pressing issue, one that threatens to blow the talks out of the water before they even begin: Israeli settlement building in the occupied West Bank.
We call on the Israelis to carry out their obligations, including a freeze on all settlements activities, which is not setting a precondition, but a call to implement an agreed obligation and to end all the closure and blockade, preventing freedom of movement, including the impositive siege.
So with the ceremony and photo opportunities over, it's time for the real work to begin. The ambitious goal to achieve an agreement on all outstanding issues within a year. It's hard to see how the current Israeli Prime Minister and Palestinian President can succeed, where in the past leaders of greater vision and stature have failed. Jackie Rowland, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
Well, joining us now to discuss these issues are our guests. In Washington, D.C., David Mack, a scholar at the Middle East Institute and a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. In London, Abdel Bari Atwan, he's the editor-in-chief of the London-based Arabic newspaper Al-Quds Al-Arabi. And in Jerusalem, Anshel Pfeffer, correspondent on Israeli and international politics at the newspaper Haaretz. Now, David Mack, if I could start with you. We've seen all of the handshakes and the photo opportunities, all of the lofty goals and admirable intentions here, but we've been down this road before, haven't we? I mean, is there any reason to believe that this latest round of US-sponsored Mideast talks will succeed where so many others have failed?
Well, what's different from the Washington perspective is that for the first time since Jimmy Carter, we have a U.S. president who has started out his term in office by putting the Arab-Israeli peace at the top of his foreign policy agenda. And that's important because other presidents have tended to put this issue in the too hard category and postponed it until circumstances forced them to become engaged. There's a reason, of course, why Obama did this. He didn't do it simply because of religious conviction, which I think was at the root of Jimmy Carter's initiative. He did it because he knows that achievement of Arab-Israeli peace is essential to U.S. national security. Washington is no longer in denial that our national security interests in the Arabian Peninsula and Persian Gulf areas, where you have 2/3 of the world's energy reserves, are connected intimately with what goes on in Palestine and Israel. And you will find, I believe, that the president enjoys very strong domestic support for this. He has problems in other areas, but on working toward Arab-Israeli peace, it is only some minority right-wing elements in the American Jewish community and right-wing evangelical Christians who have serious reservations.
All right, well, you bring up a number of points there, and what you said about President Obama coming into this relatively early in his administration, I want to put that to Abdelbari Atwan. Does that bode well, do you think, for these talks that President Obama, unlike his predecessors, is coming into this about just over a year into his administration?
Well, actually, good intention is not enough to reach a peaceful settlement to a conflict which, lasted for more than 60 years. I agree, President Obama got the good intention. He started his presidency for, calling for peace for the Arab-Israeli conflict. He said he is committed to that. He wants to open a new chapter with the Muslim world. He said the settlement is essential for American security interest in the whole region. And, but what kind of settlement is on the offer now? I believe Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, is the weakest link in these settlements or these talks. He was dragged on by force, by threatening, by intimidation to participate. He knows that what's is on the offer is not really up to the Palestinian expectation. So if there is going to be a peace settlement, I don't think it will last. I don't think it will satisfy the demands or the expectation of the Palestinian people. And it will be extremely difficult for Abbas or for President Obama to market this kind of peace deal to the Palestinians.
Anshel Pfeffer, a pretty pessimistic outlook in the region to the prospect of success of these talks. Is that generally the view in Israel as well, given the fact that your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is so beholden to the right-wing elements that he has in his coalition, who are so vehemently opposed to the freezing of settlements in the West Bank, which is one of the central issues in these talks?
Well, definitely the expectations are probably the lowest ever at any start, any ceremonial start of a diplomatic round of talks between Israel and the Palestinians. I don't think that, I don't remember the local Israeli media at any point, any similar point of the last 15 years being so muted, being so lacking in excitement and coverage of what's, I mean, there is coverage, but it's nowhere near as extensive or as exciting as it was in similar events over the last 15 years. And I think the reasons there are, as my two co-panelists have already said, this is that there might be an American president full of good intentions here, but as Mr. Atwan said, Abu Mazen and Mahmoud Abbas is a relatively weak leader. He's a weak link here. He's in Washington against really against his own free will, with very little backing, both from other Palestinian parties and even from within Fatah. And also Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington, but a lot of his coalition is not in favor of the talks. They don't believe in the talks, and they will be very much opposed to an extension of the freeze of settlements in a few weeks if Netanyahu even tries to do something of that kind. So the pessimism is well founded, definitely.
David Mack, I mean, how much leverage does President Obama really have here? I mean, you touched on this in your earlier answer. Given the fact that the Israel lobby is so powerful in Washington, can he really apply enough pressure on Israel to make realistic concessions this time?
Well, Washington is counting a lot on good sense prevailing both among Palestinians and among Israelis. Now, that is probably over-optimistic because rationality has not always been a very strong theme in Middle East politics. However, as Washington looks at Mahmoud Abbas and Benjamin Netanyahu, there is agreement on several of the points that have been made by Abdelbari al-Atwan and Anshel Pfeffer. On the other hand, there are some aspects that need to be emphasized. Although Mahmoud Abbas is internally weak, certainly doesn't have the support within the Palestinian population that Arafat had, and he has a very strong support from the rest of the Arab world, much stronger than was the case when Yasser Arafat went to Camp David, for example. And this has a lot to do with, I think, the growing maturity of Arab governments about the strategic issues at stake in the region, and a growing impatience on their part with Palestinian rejectionists who are holding out for some kind of unrealistic expectations about a return to all of Palestine. So they are providing him with considerable support, and it's no accident that the U.S. is fully committed to the quartet and that portion of the quartet's declaration which refers to the Arab League Peace Initiative. As far as Benjamin Netanyahu is concerned, I think one could say that he is a man of flexible principles. There's a reason why a lot of his right-wing coalition partners don't trust him. He has a capacity for changing the nature of his coalition. He has a capacity for showing leadership against some of the extremist elements in his coalition. He is a very skillful politician.
But sorry to interrupt you, but Palestinians, I mean, if you ask most Palestinians that, they would say he's shown almost little or no ability to move on any of these issues. I mean, what we've gotten so far was a temporary freeze on settlements in the West Bank, which is due to expire at the end of this month. And Abdel Bari, I want to put this to you. I mean, he hasn't yet at this point given an answer as to whether he would extend that or not. So where does that leave the discussion then?
Well, actually, Benjamin Netanyahu imposed his terms on the Palestinian side before even the negotiation started. He said they have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. He said also that or the Israeli government should control the future Palestinian state border. And also, he said that he will continue building housing unit in the Israeli settlement in the West Bank and Jerusalem after 26th of September, which is the deadline of the freeze of these settlements. So how can the Palestinians negotiate with the Israeli Prime Minister who imposed his condition before even the negotiation started? The Palestinian side said they will actually leave the talks immediately if a single housing unit was built on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So it means we can have maybe 2 weeks of negotiation, and after that we could face the same failure like the previous negotiation. Mr. Mack said that Netanyahu is a reliable politician and he's flexible. I would like to remind him in Waireva, he signed agreement with Arafat, but he never committed himself to this agreement. He went for general election. Also, I would like to remind him that Netanyahu has a huge skills in maneuver and also sometimes tell lies in order to deceive the other partners in the peace process. So I'm not really optimistic at all. I cannot see any goodwill or any fruits of this negotiation is coming. The Palestinians went through this for the last 17 years. They signed Oslo Agreement in 1993, hoping that it will lead to independent Palestinian state. About the Arab support to Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas, I doubt it also, because there are few Arab governments who are supporting Abbas for different agenda. Saudi Arabia, for example, Egypt, Jordan. those people are, the agenda is to confront the Iranian nuclear program. So, but we have to put into our consideration Syria, Algeria, also Libya, other Arab governments. They are not actually supporting these kind of negotiations. So we have to be careful about the Arab support here. I think Abbas doesn't need the Arab support. He needs the Palestinian support. He hasn't got a mandate from the Palestinian people to go to these negotiations, direct negotiation, and he hasn't got a mandate also to sign a peace agreement or to reach a peace agreement by the Palestinian. And there is a split in his Fatah organization, there is split in the Palestinian, there is Hamas from one side, and
all right,
also
we'll talk a little bit
side.
more about how Hamas figures into this in a moment, but I want to bring Anshel Pfeffer back into this discussion. I mean, a lot of this begs the question as to whether Israel is fully committed to a long-term solution here. I mean, it's been said that Israel is really simply trying to wait this out, that they'll continue with settlement building in the West Bank in some form, so that the reality is that there'll be not enough there for a viable Palestinian state, and Palestinians will essentially be forced to accept the reality in a sort of take it or leave it form.
I think what we should be doing here in this discussion is trying to differentiate between the tactics of both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis, the negotiating tactics that Netanyahu is using and Mahmoud Abbas are using here, and what are the real intentions and the real motives behind here. The Israeli public, let's talk about the public for a moment, not about the leaders. Israeli public for over more than a decade has, in every survey, shows a clear majority in favor of a two-state solution, where there is a real interest, a real a will for that. Now, you could ask why did the Israelis
sorry, but that two-state solution seems less and less. Sorry to interrupt, but that two-state solution seems less and less likely as long as the settlement building continues.
I agree that right now it doesn't seem very likely. But let me just finish this. In every previous round of negotiations, from the very first round of Oslo, when Rabin and Arafat were still around, to the last rounds when the current Palestinian president, Abu Mazen, was negotiating directly, no proximity and no Washington, in Jerusalem, in Ramallah, directly with Prime Minister Olmert and Foreign Minister Livni, directly negotiating. There was settlement activity going on in every single round. So basically, accusing Netanyahu of being inflexible is a bit disingenuous, because Netanyahu is the very first Israeli Prime Minister to actually stop, even for a limited period, settlement building for 10 months. It's a limited period. It's the first time ever. And as Ehud Barak, who's the more left-wing representative in Netanyahu's coalition, said this week, for the first time, we've frozen settlement activity. For 9 months, the Palestinians said it's not good enough. And now in the 10th month, the last month, they're suddenly saying, you have to carry on. This is the most important thing. And if you don't carry on freezing, then we'll leave the talks. So for the previous 9 months, the Palestinians weren't even there and weren't even willing to consider this as something which was worthwhile. So the whole terms of reference here are a bit shaky. And once again, we're talking here about tactics of negotiation. Each side is negotiating with its own hand of cards. The Israeli side have their own shaky coalition. Netanyahu's going to have to make a decision at some stage. Does he stick with his right-wing coalition? Does he move to a different coalition with more centrist parties, which will allow him to pursue a more vigorous diplomatic course? And the same goes for Mr. Abbas. Does he go forward and risk a much more serious split, the split that Mr. Atwan was talking about a moment ago, within the Palestinian camps?
I just want to get on to Hamas now, which has been conspicuously absent in all of this. David Mack in Washington, can any serious discussions really take place between Palestinians and Israelis if Hamas isn't on board? I mean, regardless of what the United States position is on them at the moment, the fact is they control the Gaza Strip, and so if by shutting them out, you're shutting out 1.5 million Palestinians.
Well, I don't think the U.S. government has shut Hamas out of peace negotiations. Hamas has excluded itself by espousing goals that are really not consistent with a final peace settlement.
Well, espousing goals, what kind of goals? Can you be more specific? What goals are you talking about?
Well, they've made it pretty clear that they're not committed to a two-state solution, that they think that they would at most accept some kind of long-term truce as far as the return of occupied territories in what is generally understood internationally to be Israel's final borders before June 1967.
But why should, sorry to interrupt, but why should Hamas or any other Palestinian group for that matter accept Israel's political demands like recognition, for example? I mean, when Israel refuses to recognize basic Palestinian demands like the right of return of refugees?
Yeah, well, you know, that's a perfectly legitimate point. But in politics and foreign policy, reality eventually has to triumph over dreams and aspirations. And the reality is that Palestinians are never going to be able to reclaim their homes in Haifa and Tel Aviv. And what they can seek, of course, is an independent, viable Palestinian state and compensation for their losses in being expelled from what would be a Jewish state of Israel side by side with a Palestinian state. And that's what should be under discussion, rather than unrealistic notions from either of the two sides. The unrealistic notion from extremist Israelis that they can settle, quote, all the lands of Israel right up to the Jordan River, and the unrealistic expectations of Palestinians, particularly Palestinians in the diaspora and in Gaza, that they can return to their lands that are inevitably going to be a part of a sovereign state of Israel.
All right, Abdelbari Atwan, the Obama administration has set a roughly one-year timetable for some sort of an agreement here. How do you see this unfolding 1 year from now in the Arab world? If there is no tangible agreement by then, what happens next?
First, let me ask Mr. Mack, you know, how somebody like him accept a Jewish state, a state based on religion in the 21st century. Why we can't have a state, secular state, where everybody can coexist, live together in United States, for example? Why, for example, that if somebody from New York cannot go and have a house in Washington, D.C. or in Florida, like us as a Palestinian? I am from Ashdod, for example, and why I cannot go and live in Ashdod? You know, like anybody else, any British can go and live in Israel. Why I cannot go and live in my hometown, Ashdod? So this is one thing. Second thing is, you know, we are asking Hamas to do what Fatah did, and without learning from Fatah experience. You know, Fatah recognized the state of Israel. I mean, the authority, PLO, the state of Israel, they recognized, you know, the Jewish right to live in Israel, as Mr. Abbas said recently in a Jewish meeting in the United States. And also, on the top of that, Abbas renounced terrorism, coordinate with the Israeli in security matters. Did he gain anything except settlement, except actually, you know, losing most of Jerusalem and losing his actually face and his pride, his respect among the Palestinians? So how can Hamas actually do what Abbas did without gaining anything but humiliation? About the 1 year gap or 1 year ceiling for this negotiation, you know, we had this before. This is the problem. We had a lot of these promises, a lot of these talks about viable independent state. I have a feeling, you know, that this 1 year ceiling is actually to prepare the ground to attack Syria or Iran or Hezbollah.
We're going to have to leave the discussion there because we are unfortunately out of time. We could certainly spend a lot more time talking about this, but I want to thank all of our guests for taking part. David Mack in Washington, Anshel Pfeffer in Jerusalem, and Abdelbari Atwan in London. Many thanks for your time. And thanks very much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.